Welcome to Degrees of Freedom. I'm Gary Parker. I'm the Deputy Director of the McSilver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research at New York University Silver School of Social Work. At the McSilver Institute, we seek new knowledge to understand the root causes of poverty. We develop evidence-informed interventions to address its consequences, and we rapidly translate research findings and new knowledge into action. And this is Degrees of Freedom. It's a web series where we interview leading policymakers, researchers, service providers who are making great strides in improving the lives of those living in poverty. And there's really no better person that personifies the mission of Degrees of Freedom than our next guest. Dr. Robert Hawkins is the McSilver Associate Professor in Poverty Studies. He's also the Assistant Dean and Director of Undergraduate Programs at New York University Silver School of Social Work. Thank you so much for joining us today, Robert. Really excited to have you here. And very inspired by a lot of the work that you've done, particularly looking at the relationship between trauma and poverty. Can you tell us a little bit about what that relationship looks like?
Sure. When you think about poverty, we often think of it as money. We think if someone doesn't have a certain amount of money, then they're in poverty. If they have more than that, then they're not. But if we took a wider look at poverty and what it really means and how people really live, one of the things that we would see, or some of the things we would see, would be health issues. We'd see, of course, high levels of debt. We'd look in communities and we'd see devastated communities, communities where there might be lots of violence. We'd find mental health issues. We'd find a history of traumatic, what many of us, if not most of us, would consider traumatic life events. And so the way I think about poverty is it goes beyond money, but it is really a cause and a consequence of negative life outcomes. Yeah. And as we start to look at individuals who live in poverty and their life chances, a lot of their life chances aren't just tied to poverty itself, it's tied to the life in which they've grown up in, which is usually also very low income. But it's not just the amount of money or lack of money, it's the collective experience.
I like this idea of kind of redefining poverty that looks beyond just median household income or using government statistics to define this, but actually looking at life circumstances. I find that really fascinating. And you have done also a lot of really groundbreaking work looking at the impacts of the survivors of Hurricane Katrina. Mm-hmm. You wrote an article, and I want to make sure I say it right, same as it always was, only worse?
Close. Same as it ever was, only worse.
Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit about that work?
So that paper stems from work I did in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, where I interviewed families, primarily low-income families, but also middle-class families as well. And one of the things that I found with the lower-income families is, as they told me their life history, they started to talk about things that were quite traumatic. I heard about experiences of rape, violence, loss of a child, loss of a sibling. Someone said to me, "This isn't the first time I've lost everything." And it became clear time and again that for many of those families, Hurricane Katrina wasn't the worst thing to happen to them. Yeah. And so it really shined a light for me on the collective experience that people in poverty have had. Yeah. That it hasn't been, it really hasn't been just about having money, being under the poverty line or over the poverty line. It's been about these experiences that have really shaped who they are, how they feel. We see in that population a lot of regulation issues, dysregulation issues, which means that they were struggling with stress. Yeah. And the stress, though, wasn't just from the hurricane. Some people were actually coping very well with the hurricane. Many of them were still stressed over other things that went on in their lives prior to Hurricane Katrina, or they were struggling with Katrina being just something else that they had to deal with.
So putting Hurricane Katrina aside, and this may even sound like an obvious question, why are those that are living in poverty more susceptible to these types of life circumstances?
Well, it's an age-old question.
Yeah.
And ideally, it would be great if poverty was just about money.
Right.
Because we can find, if we want to, we can find enough money. But poverty is very often a constructed reality.
Mm-hmm.
That, when I look at New Orleans and I see how the city has come back, and it has come back very nicely. So if you go to the French Quarter, if you go to the Superdome, you can go to very, very nice events in the convention center, and you will think the city is back.
Mm-hmm.
Go out to the upper Ninth Ward, the lower Ninth Ward, and you'll see something that was very, very similar to what the communities looked like prior to Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah.
And so what that tells me is that the economic investments have been in communities and in areas and parts of town where it matters. So where there is an economic return.
Mm-hmm.
Tourism gives you an economic return, and it gives certain people an economic return. The Superdome is there. You can see a Saints game that gives certain people an economic return.
Yeah.
Those economic returns have not been shared with the poorest part of the community.
Right.
What's happened in the lower Ninth Ward is that there's about a 4-block radius that is quite nice. And I believe President Obama was there during the 10th year recognition of Katrina. They're building a school. So there's lots of things to point to and say, look, we are returning this community to its former glory. But outside of that 4-block radius, you will find 10 years of empty lots, overgrown. You'll find some of the houses that were gutted but never torn down. You'll find people still living in some of the more dilapidated homes. So those are the folks who didn't have the resources. The resources weren't shared with them.
Mm-hmm.
And even though New Orleans is coming back, it's only coming back for certain people. There is a largely African-American community, low-income African-American community that's not being shared, for whom the resources aren't being shared. And this has to do with race. It has to do with racism, and also the flow of money in politics in New Orleans. Mm-hmm. And that can be and is repeated around the country.
Yeah, it always seems that anytime there's any type of relief effort or even public assistance programs, that those that have the most needs seem to slip through the cracks of the public safety net, So, Robert, what would you recommend then in terms of getting past these issues so that the aid goes beyond that 4-block radius and gets to those who really need it?
It's a good question. The answer sounds easier said than done.
Yeah.
I think returning to community coalitions.
Mm-hmm.
When after Katrina first happened, we had people literally from all over the world descend on New Orleans. If the coalition wasn't there, they built it. Mm-hmm. Community agencies popped up. Some of those agencies still exist. The federal government, the state government, local government, everyone was dedicated to this one cause. After a while, that all fell apart. The challenge is to build that, is to rebuild those coalitions, share power. And this is the difficult part. This is why some of this falls apart, is because there isn't the desire to share the economic or, and maybe more important, the political power. If you shared that power with people in the lower nine, people in the outskirts of town, people who don't live in the more affluent communities, you could start to see a very, very different city.
Yeah.
You can see the city that we are telling everyone that is already there.
Yeah.
And so one of the major issues is, how do you bring the people who don't have resources to the table with people who have resources?
Yeah.
And are those people with resources willing to share those resources?
Yeah.
That's how social capital works.
Yeah.
And that's how communities stay strong.
Yeah. So Robert, it sounds like we're talking about race as a variable in all of this.
Yes, race is absolutely a variable.
So let's just put it. Let's call it what it is.
It is absolutely a variable. Well, there's no accident
Yeah.
that the poorest part of New Orleans, the poorest parts of many cities, it's no accident that these are people of color, black and brown people. And when that becomes an issue, when we put that on the table, we get nervous.
Yeah.
We, meaning communities, leaders, politicians, all get nervous when we start talking about race. But I don't see any of this changing if we don't spend some time talking about race,
Yeah.
talking about why is it that the people who have come back to New Orleans, and I love how they say the people who have come back. Drive around for a while in the lower Ninth Ward, and you'll see white people. So these people who didn't really live there at all have suddenly come back, and they are the ones who have brought the community back. Not to say that there aren't people of color. There are still people of color there, but the investments seem to go where the white people go.
Yeah.
And they are often taken away or not given at all when there are people of color.
Yeah.
And that is historic, and it is contemporary.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And it's one thing that we refuse to deal with because we just won't have a conversation about race.
Yeah.
And because we like to think of ourselves as a country where there's equality, and the reality is that there isn't.
No, there are those out there that believe that racism no longer exists.
Right.
Well,
and it would be nice if racism no longer exists, but that isn't the case. One of the issues that we have now is that when we don't see cross burnings, when we don't see someone or don't hear someone using the N-word, we say, well, racism, that's not racism. But let's look at the structure. Let's look at the institutionalization of racism. We see it time and again. New Orleans is a perfect example.
yeah.
Time and again we see it. And as I go back now, I went back to New Orleans very recently, and what I see are people who are doing really well.
Yeah.
And those people are not people of color.
Yeah.
They are not the people who live at the intersection of racism and poverty.
Yeah.
And that is the reality in New Orleans. It has actually always been.
Yeah.
But that hasn't changed.
Yeah. And really, Robert, the economic oppression that's being experienced by those families of color is far worse than a cross burning or hearing the N-word.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we went in deep, Robert.
We did.
I appreciate you going right along. You're always such a wonderful speaker and an inspiration.
Thank you so much.
And I want to thank you for joining us at this episode of Degrees of Freedom, and we look forward to seeing you in future episodes.